Hello and welcome to this episode of Have You Seen? Today we're talking about something completely different. We are looking at stop motion and a bit of practical effects in movies. We'll speak about the stop motion and how it was used mainly in horror films and how CGI came along and completely changed the game. So stick around as we're going to go deep for me, into stop motion and practical effects.
Be afraid. Be very afraid.
To begin with, let's look at the history of stop motion. Stop motion, if you don't know, is a technique used in filmmaking where the movie is created frame by frame. Objects are physically manipulated in a small way and then photographed individually. When these images are played in a continuous sequence film, it creates the illusion of movement. Hence, why horror films used it and loved it all the time. Because they can bring things to life. Stop motion has a long and fascinating history in the world of cinema. It all started in the early 20th century with films like The Haunted Hotel and The Cameraman's Revenge. Yeah, I've never seen those films either, and neither have you. These films use stop motion techniques to bring inanimate objects to life, creating a sense of unease, terror, and humour, of course. Fast forward to the 1960s and we see the rise of the new kind of stop motion horror. Films like Jason and the Argonauts, Clash of the Titans took stop motion to a whole new level, bringing terrifying monsters to life. Well, terrifying for the time, they're not that scary now. During the 80s, stop motion saw a resurgence in horror films, especially with filmmakers using the technique to create some of the most memorable and terrifying creatures. There is a lot of terrifying creatures from the 80s. One of the most notable examples is the 1981 film The Evil Dead. If you've not seen our history of Evil, where we talk about the Evil Dead franchise, you can see it. I'll leave it up here, or I'll leave it a little link in the description for you to have a look at after this, obviously. Also, while you're there, and if you're enjoying this, why not leave a like and subscribe so others can see this? That'd be great. Thanks. Right, back to it. Evil Dead used stop motion to bring its deadites to life. Terrifying deadites. Again, not so terrifying now, but at the time. Another iconic 80s horror film that utilises stop motion animation is John Carpenter's remake of The Thing. It's a remake, did you know that? Well, the film's alien creature, which it can mimic any living organism and stuff, is brought to life by a combination of practical effects and stop motion animation. The results of the creature that are both horrifying and fascinating. It's a testament to the power of stop motion. Now, the effects in The Thing still hold up today. So if you haven't seen The Thing, make sure you watch it, and not the 2011 prequel, because they use some very, very dodgy CGI. Very dodgy. Repent! Repent! The 80s was a pivotal decade for stop motion animation in horror films. It was a time when filmmakers would push boundaries of what they could use, what they could do. The possibilities were endless. Using this technique created some of the most iconic and terrifying creatures, as I've said before. The 80s also saw the rise of Tim Burton, who would go on to become one of the most influential figures in stop motion, especially. You've all seen one of his stop motion films. His 1988 film Beetlejuice used stop motion animation to create the surreal and eerie world that they combine perfectly together for its dark humour and everything like that. If you've not seen Beetlejuice, make sure to check it out. Sequel coming soon. In recent years, stop motion has found a new home in the world of indie teen horror. Films like Coraline, Nightmare Before Christmas and Paranorman.
What's this?
All use stop motion to create their unique, unsettling atmosphere. I think these films are a perfect gateway for young adults or young teenagers to get into the horror genre. Yeah, stop motion is mainly used in horror films, but there are some other brilliant stop motion films that are made completely of stop motion for the wider audience, such as Wallace and Gromit.
Lovely cheese, Gromit.
Chicken Run, James and Giant Peach, Fantastic Mr. Fox, Isle of Dogs, and there's many, many more. Make sure you check them out. Now, let's move into the modern times, the rise of CGI. Stop motion isn't used as much nowadays as part of the effects. However, with CGI in the early 90s, filmmakers found they still needed that little bit extra. CGI created more fluid movement. Perfect example would be Jurassic Park, and how they used the two techniques with CGI and practical effects and stop motion. The film used them to combine the animatronics, to create the iconic dinosaurs. The T-Rex, for instance, was a full-size animatronic head thing for close-up shots, but for scenes that required more movement, CGI was used. The fluid movement in CGI is what makes it great in a way, and one of the main reasons stop motion has been phased out, because stop motion, clunky. The blend of stop motion and CGI in Jurassic Park set the standards for visual effects in cinema to come. So, I think stop motion and practical effects is something horror studios should be using more often than CGI nowadays. I understand it costs more, obviously, it takes a lot of time. When I say a lot of time, I mean a lot of time to do a CGI sequence, a stop motion sequence. CGI is very quick. You could do it. Just get an app. CGI is great if it's used correctly. So films like 1917, Dune, and even the live action version of The Jungle Book were done brilliantly. If you're interested in stop motion and not just stop motion in horror, you can have a look at some other modern movies from Aardman. That's the studio that does Wallace and Gromit and Chicken Run. And I think there's a sequel for Chicken Run that's live now on Netflix. Obviously, this isn't sponsored by Netflix, but I think it's on there. There's Leica Studios as well, who did Paranorman and Coraline. Yeah, so that has been our little talk on a brief history of stop motion in horror films in such, and how horror should be using more stop motion and practical effects nowadays than they did before. But budgets are lower, obviously. If you've enjoyed this or anything and know of any other 80s classic movies, horror movies that have stop motion and practical effects used perfectly well and greatly, why not leave them in the comment section so others can find it and we can talk about why that film is so good and why the practical effects are brilliant. But until next time, when we do another talk about something else, I don't know what, who knows. Until then, we will see you later. Thank you for watching this episode. You can check out our other videos around my face. And don't forget to subscribe.